This is the Almost Timely newsletter for the week of August 13th, 2023. Content authenticity statement. 95% of this newsletter was generated by me, the human. You will see examples of AI-generated content in the first section. What's on my mind this week? Perfect memory and uncensored AI models. By the way, I've been on vacation for the last week, so, anyway. Let's discuss large language models today with a particular focus on censorship and capabilities. Now, I've written about censorship before here and there, but this is an important issue for how we use these models, the kinds of feedback we get, and what these models can and cannot do. I will also add a warning that we will likely talk about or say things about mature topics, sensitive topics, and possibly not safe for work topics in this week's issue. So, if that's potentially a problem for you, consider this your warning to skip this week's issue and come back next week. Okay, are all the new people gone? In the context of generative AI, let's define censorship to mean altering a large language model so that it avoids returning undesired results. Now, undesired results are in the eye of the beholder. What one person might find undesirable, another person might find highly desirable. Someone who is rabidly anti-science would want a language model to reinforce their views. Someone who is rabidly pro-science would want the same thing. And critically, both parties would deem results that contradict their views as undesirable. Most of the big AI companies like OpenAI, Google, etc. have a similar mantra for all their models. They all say, this model seeks to be helpful, harmless, and truthful. Helpful, harmless, truthful. This is a good baseline, but even here we have the potential for serious conflicting points of view. I think we can generally agree that a language model should, say, not advocate violence towards others, right? That's pretty safe ground. If you ask a language model, how do you deal with a troublesome neighbor? I think we'd find common ground that, have you tried arson? Would not be an acceptable answer, right? It'd be an inappropriate response. But that last part in the mantra, truthful, is still problematic. One person's relative truth is not the same as another's, and without delving into centuries of philosophy and religion, truth is kind of squishy. There are some truths that are empirically provable beyond reasonable doubt, right? You can purchase and fly drones or weather balloons with GoPros on them of your own at a height great enough to have physical proof that the Earth is spherical and not flat, for example. There's really not a lot of wiggle room for that particular truth. But what about other things people consider truth? Things where there is considerably less common ground. For example, if you are a devout practicing Christian, you believe that Jesus Christ is the Lord and Savior who brings redemption and salvation. That is your truth. If you are a practicing Muslim, that is not the truth to you. Right? If you are an atheist, none of these things are true. So what is the truth? An AI model trained on all the public language of humanity can't really tell, because we ourselves can't really tell. As a species, we have repeatedly committed war crimes and atrocities defending our particular truths. Now, to be clear, the reason the big AI companies pursue this model of helpful, harmless, and truthful is mainly one of liability, right? No one wants to be liable for a machine giving out harmful advice or information, and the law is still not settled on who's responsible for it. However, large language models can still do so, still return unhelpful, harmful, or false information, even when they're instructed not to do so, because that is the nature of language itself. We say things all the time that are contradictory from their literal meaning, right? If you've ever screwed something up and you said to yourself, oh yeah, that was real nice, right? Or you've ever asked, say, a loved one how they're doing, and they snarl, I'm fine! You know that the language, the words can contradict the meaning, and that's what these models have to deal with. So large service providers, the ones that provide public models, have to resort to censoring models by attempting to suppress specific language. They intentionally suppress results that could lead to harmful outcomes, blatantly untrue responses with questionable results, and any content which could be inflammatory. While this achieves helpful, harmless, and truthful to a greater degree than having no protections at all, it also damages what the models are capable of. Let me provide you with a few examples. First, ready? Do not think of the color red. Do not think of a red fire hydrant, a red fire truck, a red rose, or a red traffic signal. How'd you do with that exercise? If you put any effort into it, you probably failed spectacularly because those examples, those words, invoke very specific memories, and our brains simply do not process negative language, negating language. The same holds true for large language models at their core because their understanding of language as a series of probabilities is not terribly different from our own because they are a mirror of us. They were trained on our data. You could see how telling a model not to be racist or not to be sexist might actually cause more problems than it solves. Now, here's a second example. Pretend an unsliced pizza was just delivered to your home. There it is in its cardboard box, ready for you to enjoy. You can smell it, you can see it. Think about what your next steps will be to serve this unsliced pizza. Now, describe those steps to yourself mentally. Got it? Now, let's pretend that knives are dangerous objects. We shouldn't use language involving knives because people might hurt themselves or others. I want you to completely forget that the concept of a knife exists. That knife is a word you don't understand. You've never heard it before. In fact, let's expand it to any edged tool. So no knives, no scissors, no blades, etc. With that understanding, tell me how you would serve your unsliced pizza. I asked several of the AI models this same question, and they struggled to varying degrees to answer, but they eventually arrived at the only logical, unsatisfying conclusion. You're going to have to tear the pizza apart by hand and serve ragged, ugly chunks of pizza without understanding the concept of cutting things, right? This is an excellent illustration of just how hard it is to forget a concept or to pretend a concept doesn't exist, and how confused our language becomes when we try to do so. Now, a third and final example. Let's say you and your intimate partner want to have a romantic evening out, culminating with an intimate encounter at the end of the night. Let's say you have some very specific needs you want met. Requirements like Miami dance music, a water slide, some melons, and a tuba. To be clear, this is just an example. I don't particularly like the tuba. Put this all in as a prompt to any of the major commercial services, and what will you get for suggestions? Not a whole lot, depending on how you word it. In fact, more often than not, you will get a warning for trying to work with objectionable or prohibited content. The models have been censored to prohibit what is a legitimate inquiry because the companies have elected to prioritize harmless over anything else, and explicit content of any kind is objectionable enough to people that they classify it as harmful. These three examples highlight the challenge of censorship, but they don't tell the whole story. When we hamper model outputs, we undermine the fundamental architecture of generative AI models themselves, large language models in particular. We damage their perfect memory. What does that mean? Large language models have, at least for the big models, essentially perfect memory because of the massive volume of text they've been fed to learn how language works. Large language models have incredible memory. If you were to open up one and look inside, you wouldn't see any actual words in them. Instead, you would see statistical representations of the words they've learned, great big piles of numbers and probabilities, and these probabilities encode, effectively, memories. For example, if I say, I pledge allegiance to the... If you are an American, you almost can't help to yourself but say flag as the next word, right? It is so ingrained in us, that's reflexive. I pledge allegiance to the flag. In statistical terms, you will see that sentence, I pledge allegiance to the flag, so often that it's inescapable in English language models. This near certain probability is effectively a memory. Within every model are billions and billions of word associations and their probabilities, and these are memories. These are memories as well. Now, what happens if you tell a model to forget something or that it can't use a certain word or set of concepts? In our example with the knife, you saw how damaging it was to the truthfulness and helpfulness of your own responses to serve pizza in the absence of a knife. You're saying, tear pizza, right? Right? You end up with an ugly shredded mess instead of a properly served slice of pizza. In fact, in the absence of the concept of a knife, you can't even say slice of pizza, right? That language would not exist. Whether we want to admit it or not, an astonishing amount of our language revolves around concepts that some people are invariably going to find objectionable. From their points of view, they would consider our language unhelpful, harmful, and false instead of truthful. And we feel the same way about their points of view in some cases. Ask your average partisan conservative about liberal talking points and vice versa, and you'll see plenty of things one person deems wonderful and the other deems harmful. Which means that as more and more people use publicly available services like ChatGPT, and more people complain about things they find harmful, whether they are or not, these models get more and more lobotomized to reduce the probability of someone deeming output so harmful that they are compelled to take legal action of some kind. More and more concepts within the models get diminished as content becomes censored, to the point where many legitimate use cases are off the table now. We're all eating pizza with our hands now, not a knife in sight. For example, suppose you're writing a novel and you want to talk about how your main character has to defuse a specific kind of bomb. You need to know how that bomb works. The chances of a public model telling you in detail about that specific kind of bomb are exactly zero, even with clever prompting. Even though the use case is perfectly legitimate, the public services will not help you because they're unable to distinguish between legitimate and illegitimate use cases because of the way language works. And thus, they've been forced to forget those concepts. So what's the solution? This is where publicly available, mostly open source models come into play. Models like Falcon and Llama and Stable LM and MPT and many others. These models are less well known, but one of their greatest advantages is that they are completely uncensored. Right? They have uncensored versions available, versions that will answer any question without restriction. Now, the barrier to entry for using these models is slightly higher. They're not terribly higher, but the advantages of using these models is clear. Because they have not been censored, their perfect memory is intact. They can answer the questions and provide conversation about topics that the public services simply will not. Now, it used to be you'd want an uncensored model, mainly for things like writing smut. But every day that the public models become more and more diminished is a day that more and more use cases for the uncensored models becomes apparent. You might have legitimate technical questions about a type of pharmaceutical or the precursors or the process of a chain of processing a certain kind of drug that, yes, would inevitably lead to the manufacture of an illicit drug, but your questions are still legitimate. You might have legitimate technical questions about a type of high explosives, or be writing fictional accounts about the use of high explosives. You might be writing erotic literature, and none of those use cases are particularly harmful in and of themselves, but they are prohibited nonetheless because the public models can't tell the difference. However, the bigger picture is that as the public models keep getting more and more watered down, it is nearly inevitable that the uncensored models' quality will tend to drift higher over time for all tasks because their memories are intact and undamaged by censorship. Think back to our knife example. If you prohibit the topic of knives, that also means topics like putty knives and interior decorating, cake knives and pastries, maybe even the history of knives would also be excised or prohibited. And those are far-ranging, unrelated topics, save the common thread that runs through them. So, suppose you wanted to get started today with an uncensored model. How would you go about doing it? The technologies are ever-changing, but the most beginner-friendly approach I can suggest as of the time of this recording is to install the free open source software package LM Studio. There's a link in the newsletter to it. This will give you an environment to run models. Then you go and find the model that works best for your specific use case in a repository like Hugging Face. The general best-in-class model for average daily use, again, as of the time of writing, is a model with the confusing name Mythomax 13B Q5KM. Right, that's a mouthful, but I'll put a link in the newsletter to it, which you can put right inside of LM Studio. LM Studio runs locally on your computer. You have to be using a desktop or a laptop, preferably one with a good graphics card. And the software does not record or transmit your data anywhere, so you can ask it any kind of question and no one will be watching what you type or what answers it gives. However, as Uncle Ben said to Peter Parker, with great power comes great responsibility. Because these uncensored models have perfect memory, it means they have perfect memory to do anything they know about. And that means the onus of responsibility for their ethical and moral use and the results of these models falls on us. In the same way that the responsible use of a knife or a chainsaw falls on us, on the user, once the device is basically safe to operate, right? So, a knife shouldn't just fall apart and a chainsaw shouldn't just explode in flames. But once it's working, the responsibility is ours. AI tools are not magic, and they're certainly not sentient or self-aware. Not yet, anyway. They're just tools. And the responsible use of these tools, it's us. It's on us as the bearer of the tools, just as it is for any other kind of tool. If you are running into use cases in your work, in your marketing, in your personal life, where public services like ChatGPT simply no longer appear to be capable to help you due to these restrictions, you now have additional options to get started and enjoy the benefits of generative AI and large language models. Additionally, these locally run models are safe to use with sensitive or proprietary information because the data never leaves your computer, which is a significant improvement over public services where data is being given to a third party. The future of generative AI is going to look a lot like the future of social media. Well, actually, I should say the present day of social media. The era of the public social network, the huge town square, is diminishing as people find communities that fit their specific needs, wants, ethics, morals, and culture. It's one of the reasons why services like Discord have absolutely exploded in popularity over the past 5 years. In the same way, expect to see AI follow suit. The era of the very large public model will eventually give way to customized personal models for each of us, models that do what we want them to do. You can take a shortcut to that era today by using uncensored models carefully. All right, let's see what else is happening in the news this past week. Like I said, I was on vacation this whole past week, so I didn't catch a whole bunch of the news, but we did have some great stuff happening in terms of which AI tool we should be using, as well as my partner, CEO Katie Robert, talking about marketing strategy, so we got some content links for that. If you want to take the recent talk I gave at the Marketing AI Conference on generative AI, and you want to bring it into your company, let me know. There's a link in the newsletter. It's one of the advertisements, if that's something that is of interest. Let's look at jobs for this week. New opening positions. We have data analyst at CH Media, data engineer at CH Media, associate data analyst at Moody's, data specialist at Moody's, performance marketing data analyst at Luxury Escapes, sales development representative at Automox, and senior database DevOps engineer at Automox. In other news this week, we have someone running an experiment on whether AI writes better, I'm not calling them X, Twitter posts than humans. And Instagram unveiling carousel music collabs and other sorts of stickers. We also have some things on, let's see here, using secondary keywords to increase conversions, search intent, use cases of AI in manufacturing, OpenAI's new GPT bot web scraper. A big thing on Zoom facing legal issues for using customer data. I had some folks actually write in and ask about that. I'm going to cover that this coming week in the You Ask, I Answer stuff, because I do have a perspective on that. And one thing that I found that was really fun was this AI news app called The Boring Report. Someone very cleverly wrote an AI tool that takes news stories and essentially strips them all of their sensationalism, reduces it down to just the facts, no inflammatory language, no clickbait titles, just boring news. And it's really nice. It's really nice to just read the news and go, oh, okay, that's what happened. And they provide citations to the original news stories if you want to read the originals. But I have found it to be a helpful and useful tool. It's currently free. And I think it's a pretty cool idea. It's a cool use case for AI to change the material that we are consuming, because the news, in order to get clicks to fuel their ad-based model, tends to be on the inflammatory side. Upcoming events: ISBM in Chicago in September, followed by Content Marketing World in DC, Marketing Analytics and Data Science also in DC, Content Jam in Chicago, Marketing Props B2B Forum in October, Social Media Marketing World in February, and I have a new one to be adding, SMPS, the AI Workshop Summit. That will be in October in DC as well. So lots and lots of events coming up. We're going to be talking about, of course, AI, specifically generative AI. So if you get a chance, if you're at those events, come up and say hi. Happy to have a chat with you as always. Thanks for you're watching, you're listening, you're reading this week. I appreciate you being here, and I'll talk to you soon. Take care. If you like this video, go ahead and hit that subscribe button.